Rabbi Didy Waks is our go-to person when it comes to the Jewish faith. And here we are. It's Hanukah time. And Rabbi, good morning. Thanks for coming on.
Good morning. How are you doing?
Wonderful. And I want to start with your take, your personal take on Jerusalem and the move the president made yesterday and the impending, what many around the world are saying. There's only two countries in agreement here. It's us and Israel. Everybody else is against this move, but they claim we're going to see a lot of violence throughout the world over this. What are your thoughts?
Okay. How did I know you were going to ask me this?
Well, you know.
So, no, I usually I don't answer political questions, but this is one that is obviously very dear to me, and this is more personal than it is political,
yeah,
to me at least. So obviously, maybe not so obviously, I was very touched and moved that this was done, and I've been extremely critical, and like many, it's fascinating to see the response of the Jewish community, because even though many are very critical of the president,
yeah,
when they were very, very moved by the fact that he did this, because this is something that people have to realize, even with all the criticism surrounding it, every president almost has promised they would do this on the campaign trail, and no president has actually done it, which is fascinating to think of on its own right.
And when you say that, when you say that, we could look at our modern day presidents. President Obama, President Bush, both said that they were going to do this, and then once they got in office, realized people were like,
that
wow,
it's more complicated.
Yeah. Yes.
that's
so,
the way they always say it.
Do you have any fear, though, that this is going to set? Certainly, we've made no gains when it comes to the peace process there. Maybe we have made gains, but we certainly have not reached the point where we've reached peace. Do you fear that this is going to be just used as an excuse to create more violence in that part of the world?
So, if it is going to be used as an excuse to make more violence, that is my question to anybody who says that as a reason why Jerusalem shouldn't be pronounced as Israel's capital. My question is, should we blame Israel or the president then, or should we blame those who are going to perpetrate violence? It's really a question of, do you blame the victim? It is really calling one country's capital enough to cause violence. Remember, people say, "Oh, it's a sensitive issue. It's a sensitive issue," and nobody said that a future Palestinian state is not going to have Jerusalem as a capital as well. Nobody. He specifically avoided saying, and he actually said it clearly, I'm not getting into whether or not it will be whether it's a united Jerusalem or whether East Jerusalem will be the Palestinian capital. So this notion that he's automatically throwing out any possibility of, and this is regardless of my opinion on the matter, of a Palestinian state or Jerusalem as a Palestinian place, is just not true. So all he was saying was, Canberra is the capital of Australia, and Washington D.C. is the capital of America, and Jerusalem is the capital of Israel. And if that causes violence, then you have to ask yourself very seriously, were the people who are going to be causing the violence going to cause the violence anyway? And to dance around this issue and say, well, it's a very touchy and very touchy subject in that region of the world. Well, we better deal with that then very, very quickly.
And let's, in full fairness, we have recognized Jerusalem as the capital of Israel for quite some time now. Well, I say quite some time, probably maybe the last 5-10 years that it became official, but we just have never moved, the embassies never moved to Jerusalem. So it's not that big of a move. It's an official move.
It's more complicated than that. I know that there was actually a Supreme Court case with a child who is born. I don't know all the details, but he wanted to have Jerusalem. He was born in Israel, and the government wrote Jerusalem on his passport, and he wanted it to say Israel, but they wouldn't because they didn't recognize. They didn't recognize Israel, and there was a Supreme Court case, and they didn't win. And now, obviously, things will change. So even though there was a somewhat recognition, now it will be very, very clear.
All right. I wanted to ask you another before we get to Hanukkah. Another question. I'm a huge Larry David fan. Obviously, Larry David is Jewish. On Saturday Night Live about a month ago, he went off the. I've kind of felt he went off the deep end. Were you offended by? First of all, he's like, I got to tell you, the elephant in the room. It's all these sexual charges. They all happen to be Jewish, which is certainly no longer true. If it ever was. But then he went down the Holocaust road. Were you bothered by that?
I hope I don't offend anyone, but I really wasn't, and I didn't really get it. And it seemed like why people were so upset. I thought it was horrible humor. It wasn't actually funny.
I felt the same way.
That's a Larry David problem, not a.
It just wasn't funny. It was. I mean, it wasn't about it wasn't being offended about the Holocaust. Like, is it too soon? Which was one of his lines. It just was a very unfunny routine that he did that kept going on and on, I thought.
Right, and I think it may have been different if he wasn't Jewish, which I know is problematic, and I understand that that gets people upset too. Like, why can some people? But you do have that cultural, phenomenon that different cultures can. So I didn't. I mean, he was making fun. If you take it to, specifically, he was making fun of the way he would act in a concentration camp rather than making fun of anything to do with the Holocaust. It's very different. It wasn't a Holocaust joke per se. So it's still uncomfortable for Jews, obviously, but when people jump, I have a huge problem with the oversensitivity about everything.
Right.
And then people can censor whoever they want whenever they want.
Fair enough, but I agree with you that it just wasn't a funny routine. But if you're Larry David, you're at the level where you can do that. And so, it didn't hit the way you wanted it to hit. You move on. Everybody loves Curb Your Enthusiasm. So we ask this question every year, Rabbi. What is Hanukkah for those who are not Jewish? What is Hanukkah?
Well, I'll tell you that this year Hanukkah takes on a whole new meaning because of what we spoke about. The first part of the conversation, because at the end of the day, Hanukkah was in many ways a rededication of Jerusalem. The word Hanukkah means to dedicate and to inaugurate, and that's what happened after the war of the Maccabees. And in very short, the Assyrian Greeks didn't want the Jews to continue practicing their faith. It was more of a religious war at the beginning. They insisted that they adopt the Hellenist lifestyle, and the Jews sort of didn't fall for it. And eventually, a very weak army, the Jewish people, led by Judah the Maccabee and the group of Maccabees, ended up fighting and winning the war. And then there was a more spiritual part of the fight, which was that they needed to light the candles on the menorah, and they didn't have any oil that was pure, because part of what the Assyrian Greeks did was to defile that oil. And because what they were saying was, we don't mind if you light the menorah, we just mind that you think this is spiritual and that you can't have unholy stuff and holy stuff. They didn't subscribe to that whole notion. Yeah. So they defiled it. So they had nothing to light the menorah with. And then eventually they found one that was still pure, and so they used it, and then it lasted for, instead of the 1 day's worth, it lasted for the entire 8 days. So
there you have
the miracle of Hanukkah, and that's all about. But then it became all about really Jerusalem and about rededicating the temple, and so that's what we do. And now, obviously, this year, in many ways, we're rededicating Jerusalem and seeing Jerusalem being accepted as a center of Israel. And again, anyone that tries to take away that connection, that bond between the Jewish people and Jerusalem, it's crazy, because this is a story that happened thousands of years ago and is just one step in that long chain of our connection with Jerusalem.
This was never the biggest holiday for the Jewish faith, but because there's Christmas that kind of goes hand in hand, and the big celebration, especially in the United States, it's all been a little commercialized, hasn't it?
To some degree, yeah, and I don't know if that was commercialized by Jews or not. It's the reason. I don't know why. I think the Christmas thing definitely plays a role. When we say it's not a big holiday, what that means is it's not of biblical origin, obviously, because it takes place much later in history. So it's a much later. It's actually a rabbinic holiday. It didn't even make it into the canon of the Tanakh, of the Old Testament. So it's not it doesn't carry as much weight, and there aren't as many rules on that holiday, whereas all the other holidays have a lot more. So yeah, it is much less. However, Jews have sort of adopted weird holidays that they get excited about.
Yeah,
Jews love Passover, which is one of the biblical holidays, and Hanukah. Those two are the most celebrated holidays.
Right. How long?
More than English.
How long does Hanukkah go this year? What are the dates?
It starts this Tuesday evening. Remember, all Jewish holidays start at night. So at sunset on Tuesday evening, the 12th, and then it goes for 8 days.
8 crazy nights, as
That's right.
we have heard. All right, good stuff. Thanks, Rabbi Didy Waks. We appreciate your time. Thank you.
Great chatting. Thanks so much.
Okay.
Always fun.